Most people think the event itself is the moment that matters. The eclipse, the new moon, even the equinox. But in complex systems, the most revealing phase is the one just before the transition. And that's exactly where we are right now. We're not at the event itself. We're in the compression phase leading into it. If you've been paying attention this week, you may have noticed something subtle. Not a dramatic shift or even a big decision, just certain things feeling different. Maybe a conversation that used to carry emotional weight just doesn't anymore. Or a situation that used to pull your attention has gone quiet. Maybe you've noticed yourself in more of an observational state than usual, less reactive or more still. Most people don't quite know what to make with that feeling because we're conditioned to expect that change needs to feel significant. But what's actually unfolding right now is significant. It's just more structural than visible. Earlier this month, we moved through a lunar eclipse on March the 3rd, and now we're moving towards the equinox on March 20th, which marks the beginning of an entirely new solar cycle. But it isn't just the equinox. Part of what makes this corridor genuinely unusual is what's converging with it, and we'll get into that in a moment. But perhaps what's even more interesting is what's happening in the pre-moments leading up to it, because it doesn't feel like momentum, so we assume that nothing is happening. But situations that used to trigger you don't land the same way, or there's a sense that something is shifting, but it isn't fully visible yet. And if you don't recognize this pattern, it's easy to assume that nothing's happening. But in complexity science, there's this well-documented phenomenon called critical slowing down. And what researchers have observed in ecosystems, weather systems, in brain states, and even in financial markets is that before a major system transition, the system doesn't speed up. It slows down. It becomes quieter and less reactive and more internally organized. The instability begins at the edges almost imperceptibly as the system reorganizes itself internally before anything becomes visible on the external. But here's what many people miss about this phase. We tend to assign meaning to the visible moment, the conversation that finally ends, the decision that gets made, the clarity that arrives. We say that's when it changed. But in most systems, the visible moment is just when the internal change becomes legible. The change itself happened earlier, in the quiet, in the emotional neutrality, in the subtle reduction of investment you noticed but didn't quite name yet. This is why right now, this pre-Equinox window is often the most information-rich period of the entire cycle. Not because dramatic things are happening, but because the signals are most visible here, before the event itself obscures them. For example, the relationship dynamic you've been watching. Its structure is visible right now, before the shift makes it look inevitable in retrospect. Or the pattern that's been loosening. It's legible right now before the new configuration fully arrives. This is the moment to observe. It's not to fix or even to make decisions. It's to notice what is already reorganizing on its own. There's this moment in Star Trek, maybe you remember it, just before the Starship Enterprise jumps into warp speed. First, everything visually slows. The space around the ship stretches, the field distorts, like the entire universe is holding its breath, and then suddenly, warp ignition. The ship disappears into acceleration. That compression moment isn't something gone wrong, it's the precondition for the jump. Plasma physicists describe something similar. Energy accumulates in a field until the threshold is crossed, and then the system reorganizes extremely quickly. But the slow part comes first, and right now, we're in the slow part. What I'm noticing is less reactivity, more internal sorting, less emotional gravity with situations that used to carry real charge. And often, the first instinct is to interpret that as something being wrong. Asking yourself, am I withdrawing? Is this just avoidance? But what's actually happening isn't disengagement, it's the psyche quietly withdrawing its attention from structures that are no longer aligned. Not through conscious decision, but because the alignment that once sustained them is simply no longer there. So as we move towards the equinox on March 20th, what's making this passage feel even more palpable is what's actually converging during this window. On March 18th, a new moon is resetting emotional cycles. On March 20th, Mercury is stationing direct, restoring forward movement in the mental field. And on the same day, the equinox itself arrives, resetting the solar cycle for an entire year. Together, that's emotional, mental, and directional change. That's 3 layers stacking inside a single window. And all of this is happening right at the transition from Pisces to Aries, which we interpret as a shift from disillusion, clearing, and internal processing to initiation, movement, and more outward expression. And right now, we're in the 3 days leading directly into that convergence. So if you're noticing that you feel quieter right now, and if certain situations have simply stopped requiring your energy, or you find yourself observing more than reacting, that makes perfect sense. What you're likely noticing is the structural precondition of a transition. We are sitting right at a point where one phase has completed internally, but the next phase hasn't fully begun. That in-between place can be uncomfortable precisely because it's real. And the most useful thing you can do here is the thing that feels counterintuitive. Let it be quiet. Don't force interpretation. Don't accelerate what wants to move slowly. Just observe. Because what you notice now, in the stillness, before the exhale, is often the cleanest signal of what's actually ready to change. So here's what I want to leave with you. In the next few days, leading into March 20th, just notice, where has something simply stopped requiring your energy? Not because you withdrew it or it ended dramatically, but because the internal structure that organized around it is no longer active. That's the signal. That's what this corridor is showing us. And whatever is surfacing right now, before the exhale of the event itself, pay attention to it. Because the most meaningful information in any transition tends to arrive in the pre-moment, not at the event itself. If this resonates, feel free to subscribe, and I'll continue to explore this cycle as things unfold in the days ahead. I'm Katya, and I'll see you in the next one.